welcome you all to this Practical Buddhist Wisdom series this morning. We'll be talking about the topic called, and I know Lakipu helped, this topic title, Radical Mindfulness and Social Change. And it's a really important topic, and there are so many directions we could go with it, and it'll be fun to see where we end up today. So I thought we would just first start by talking a little bit about what we think about what is social change, what does that mean, and what does it look like. And so as you all think about maybe activities you've been engaged in related to this, I'd like to invite you to share your thoughts about that. What do we mean by social change, and what does it look like? Takes you?
Generally, when I've been involved in social change, it's involved testifying before some kind of a board or committee. Mm-hmm. So when someone forwarded the question to the Wisconsin State Board of Nursing a number of years ago, was healing touch within the scope of practice of registered nurses, mm-hmm. and the state board had a hearing. Somebody else submitted like all kinds of paperwork and studies, etc. Mm-hmm. But they asked me to be the voice and to answer the questions and testify before the board, and so I did. Mm-hmm. And prior to that, as a graduate student, when I say the Gingrich Congress took over many years ago and was mm-hmm. trying to cut funding to higher education and all kinds of things, they sent out, the House Budget Committee sent out a small group to 5 different places in the United States to hear what the public had to say. Mm-hmm. One of them was Prescott, Arizona. So I went up on a bus to Prescott, and I was one of the people who testified before the committee. Or when I was on the National Association of Graduate Professional Students, we go to D.C. and we lobby Congress. So my experience of social change has been in terms of testifying or just going to the committee and mm-hmm. giving my opinion.
Wonderful. So efforts to bring together information to affect change in policies or ways that issues are being considered, and bringing a voice to a particular way of thinking about something. And it might involve testifying to decision makers who actually have power to affect change in those areas. Mm-hmm. But I also hear you talking about kind of you have this rally of people who want to support this cause, and then you take that message forward to those who have power. Thank you. Yeah. Any other thoughts about what this means? Yeah.
It means creating intentional community in ways that sort of support the kinds of choices you want to make about life and how you're living with others. So for example, my friends live in a log cabin in the woods without running water or electricity, and they're sort of part of a loose network of people who do that in the northern part of the state. And so they're creating they're living obviously off the grid, but also in ways that involve spirituality and sort of creating a different kind of way of interacting with the earth. Another example would be friends of mine who don't like the way that gender is played out in human relations, right? These days, I guess. And so they create space where they can choose to use gender-neutral pronouns, for example, that don't necessarily exist in the English language. There's all this grammar problem around the use of the word they, which is like a plural sort of pronoun, and using it for themselves So like, I see social change as the process by which people create different ways of interacting with each other, and it's sort of navigating or bridging the gap between individual identity and human identity as a broader concept.
Those are wonderful examples, and wonderful examples of social change in social relations. And also you spoke about change in how we relate to nature. So social change can involve efforts to creatively mobilize or redefine how we're living in relationship to the environment, to others. Those are great examples. Thank you so much. So anyone else want to share anything about their thoughts about what is social change and what are some examples you've been involved in or you're aware of? Anything else? Yeah.
I was involved in a Whole Foods cooperative for 15 years, and that was before it was cool. And mostly struggled, but knew we were setting a precedent, trying to set our values, like how we ate mattered. It mattered how the land was treated, that same piece of how are we going to live in a way that seems at least more sustainable,
Yes.
local, organic, kind of thing. And then as I worked there, just noticing that any one decision, every decision that I make is a political decision, some way or another. And so watching how I spent my money, watching, was it a lot of packaging, just watching a lot of the ways that economically even I made decisions.
Very interesting. So you're really describing the kinds of change efforts you've been involved in and how they actually changed you and how you lived. And it's really, really beautiful. And so social change refers to any kind of alteration in the social order of a society. And all of these examples you've given are really beautiful in describing the changes in social relations, social behaviors, changes in nature and social institutions, which would include the policies and practices and those kinds of things. And social change often is motivated by a wish to alleviate suffering, to influence others, to create more equality. I'm a professor in social work, and we train our students from day one in how to advocate for a more just and humane society that meets the needs of populations that are considered to be disenfranchised, disempowered by our social institutions and all of that. So it's a really important topic, really, for anyone who cares about making the world a better place. And then, of course, there are myriad ways that we go about attempting to affect change, right? And many challenges that social change agents experience in trying to create the kinds of changes that we want in society, right? So let me ask you this: what are just some of the challenges you faced in these change efforts that you've been engaged in, or challenges you've seen other change agents struggle with? Yes.
One was just process, that we live in a domination type of society, so majority rules. And so we had to learn consensus facilitation and a whole different process than what we were used to.
Yeah. Well, yeah, so just the challenge of getting along with others in order to be able to work together to figure out what to do to mobilize our efforts to make change. That's huge. Yeah. So the interpersonal relationships that we're engaged in to affect change becomes really important, and how we're in relationship to that. So thank you. What other challenges have you encountered?
There's inertia, both in terms of attitude and in terms of overcoming just sort of a static environment where things are not changing. and then the energy required to sort of initiate change, where does that come from? And can it be provided sustainably, whether it's the human energy it takes to work for the change, or establishing networks that support the kinds of social change you're working to create.
Yeah, it's an excellent observation. So there's this deeply embedded, for many of these issues, there are deeply embedded structures that are in place and that aren't easily moved. They aren't easily shifted. And then, you have this all the social structures around, what you're trying to accomplish, and then our own personal inertia, right? And the extent to which we are skillful and can actually do what it is that is required to affect change, and in relationship with others as well. So very challenging. Thank you. It was a great insight. Any other thoughts?
Generally what I've been involved in, again, is it goes around communication and languaging. People with different viewpoints use different language and see the world in a different way. And so the communication between the various groups, they run up against this barrier of being unable to cross the communication.
Yeah.
So my skills have generally been in understanding the ideas of enough of both that I could language across, so to explain one view so that the others could understand it.
Yeah. So perception is everything, and the perceptions that maintain the energetic of what is, and that and that some perceptions can be more malleable to change, and some aren't quite so malleable to change. And then we bring our own perceptions to something that can be flexible or rigid, and then the challenges that can come with trying to do that. And so then we work toward cultivating skillful means to figure out what are the perceptions of those that we're trying to work with, and how can we do that skillfully. Yeah. Any other thoughts? Yes.
I'm sorry, I was really thinking about some of the things that were said, so I missed a little piece, but my thought was that we just sort of are naturally resistant to change, that we kind of instinctively seek a stable state.
Yeah, that's right. And the extent to which change is difficult. And we're used to things being a certain way and or wanting things to be a certain way. And that can be from our side as change agents, and then also, of course, from any of the social structures we're working with to affect change. And even in these communities, these idealistic, beautiful communities that are living together, I imagine there's some challenges there when you bring a group of people together with their perceptions about what it is they're trying to create. How likely is it that they all have the exact same perception of that vision? Not so likely. So that's a really interesting challenge as well. I wanted to share with you, there's a report that's available online. It's a research report prepared by the Ford Foundation, by the Center for Contemplative Mind and Society. And if any of you'd like the title of this, I can give you the resource. But it was a report called Inviting the World to Transform, Nourishing Social Justice Work with Contemplative Practice. And what they did is they interviewed people who've been in the field of social justice work for decades, who also have a contemplative approach to how they engage in that work. And they asked them, what are the challenges you have faced over the course of your life as a social advocate? And then, how have contemplative practices helped you in those efforts? And so I want to share with you a few of the challenges they talked about. They talked about level 1 challenges and level 2 challenges. And the level 1 challenges included things like losing perspective of the long view. So being engaged and trying to, you have good intentions, you're trying to do something, and then you get kind of lost in the inertia and lose the long view. And that's really problematic because you get kind of stuck in this And that we know that going to the balcony and seeing the big perspective is really important and helpful. The other one is lack of funding or lack of appreciation, right? So the extent to which we need resources to support our effort, or we need appreciation to sustain us so we can continue to do the work that we do. Another is burnout. And this is something that Domo Geshe Rinpoche has done a lot of teachings on, because she's really seen how for many people with good hearts who want to help others, many of them burn out. And why is that? And so that's another topic altogether, but a real important challenge, because when you burn out, you basically become ineffective. Then the level 2 challenges were more subtle, but the individuals they interviewed agreed that these were more insidious and more challenging, if you can imagine, more challenging than these level 1 challenges we've talked about. And they said that one of these challenges is working from a place of righteousness and excessive anger, and the toxins of that stance. Another was replicating one system of injustice with another. And this is the idea that change agents can work really hard to affect change in this particular area without seeing the myriad ramifications of that that are totally missed, that may actually cause more harm. So one example they described was this effort there was a farm out in, I don't know if it was Massachusetts or Vermont, and this group of advocates worked tirelessly to make sure that this last farm in this particular area that one of the large corporations was trying to buy, that they would not be able to buy this piece of land. And so they raised millions of dollars, like $3 million, to make sure that this corporation was not going to be able to buy this land. And they were successful, and they rejoiced, and they realized they had spent a lot of money doing that, right? And then, to their great horror, they kind of looked at then what happened, and the billions of dollars that were spent in all of these other ways and these other locations that bought up all this other stuff. There was something that got missed, and there was all this other in their minds harm that transpired as a result of this. So, and I don't remember all the details of this, but it's just that idea of you get so focused on what you're trying to do, and you lose sight that what else is going on, and that was interesting. Another is operating within larger cultural assumptions of busyness, materialism, project orientation, and individualism. And, it's just kind of interesting to contemplate that. Yes?
Could you give that list again, a little slower?
This last one?
Yeah.
Operating within larger cultural assumptions of busyness, materialism, project orientation, and individualism. And our capacity to address these challenges and our capacity for success, of course, is influenced by many, many factors, right? And I thought it would be really interesting for you all to hear Domo Geshe Rinpoche talk about the kinds of strategies that change agents generally use. And she's going to describe 4 different kinds. And she describes this teaching was a teaching that she gave on what she called, she broke down the idea of activism into what she called dangerous activism and safe activism. And so dangerous activism, it was a previous teaching in which they talked about, things like going to Pakistan and standing in front of, military, the big tractors that are plowing down the fields and, things like that where literally your life is in danger. And she said, and sometimes safe activism can turn into that, right? But this teaching is really more about this more safe activism and the approaches that we use. And I think a lot of the ways we're talking about this today are forms of safe activism, so it's really relevant. So the clip is about 25 minutes, and I think you'll enjoy hearing her talk about this. And as you think about, what I'd like to suggest is, as you think about what she's sharing with us and also these challenges we've talked about, you might just reflect on how do you think cultivating mindfulness might help us to address any of these issues. So, because that's really what we're going to be talking about today. What does mindfulness have to do with this? And how might it help us be more skillful?
So we're talking now about strategies. I was going to put down best strategies, but then I had to cross off the word best because there's a lot of strategies which don't work. Yes? Mm-hmm. All right. Now I don't know whether you're going to consider this one a best strategy or not, but one of the strategies that activists, the energy source from which activists draw their strength is anger. Anger was at the top of my list. How about, what do you think? Yes? Yes, okay. Not only anger, but anger and or violence. And these are extremely common. They're extremely common, and the nature of anger. We had a all-day intensive just this past weekend, where we were working on strategies dealing specifically with anger, and how to and the dynamics of anger. Anyway, it was all day. It was all day. So we had a number of different attitudes that we pursued, and these strategies, the strategy of anger is one that has probably the highest incidence of this EMF. Did I say it right? Electromagnetic frequency. More of the, and I say it that way because many people in the West are becoming, and people everywhere are becoming concerned with the electromagnetic frequencies exuded even by your toaster, who you thought never hurt anybody and was your friend, and now you find out that you have to go behind one of those lead shields like they give you X-rays to make toast in the morning. That everything, and you look very suspiciously at light bulbs and electric cords, as well as the real culprits, which of course in the big swim of things are microwaves or objects such as this. And however, it has been recently, I think very recently, they have actually been able to measure the EMFs from the human field. And like that, they're related to these energies, but there are different levels of these energies which are affecting people on many different levels of their being. And anger is a disruptive energy, which literally causes you to, rather than be able to make a point, it literally causes you to lose your mind and unable to think clearly. And in that way, the very thing that you are angry about, that you want to have addressed, is the very thing that you cannot really verbalize carefully, and in addition, that you are sending energy to literally lash and whip that person, lash and whip that person that you are speaking to. It doesn't matter. They could even be an advocate. They could even be an advocate of your same position. And if you have like 2 or 3 people who are able to get angry together about a certain issue, and I mean really angry, and woe unto the 4th person that arrives in that group, because you might have, like going up to the top of a mountain, you may have had to acclimate carefully with each other. And you can't just jump in on the discussion, or you might get what they call altitude sickness from the amount of anger energy which is being produced. This anger energy, if you are wanting to affect change, anger energy is the one that will never succeed. At the same time that you are performing a virtuous activity, at the very same time that you are negating the virtuous activity by trying to whip the person that you are speaking to, and what would their reaction be? Yes? They would put up their hands. They would put up their hands. They would try to resist your anger. Puny them. There was one of my favorite cards I ever saw. There's this picture of a little girl, who is who has this really look on her face, and she says, and the underneath it says, I have whipped men of steel in my days. What to say of these men of butter? And sometimes if I feel anger arriving in me, that I used to think about this little girl's face and be able to laugh at it, and in that way I didn't choose anger as the strategy that I was going to use. And the anger that you are experiencing, in addition, the anger is the very energy which is going to cause you to burn out regarding very careful issues, that you become very quickly a casualty of the activist syndrome, I'm going to call it. And you are experiencing heightened anatomic nervous system, that your adrenaline is becoming stimulated on a regular basis, and you no longer are able to control. I'm going to say that you become very familiar with anger, and you tend to use anger in situations that are not even activist. Isn't that so? That it becomes your weapon of choice, and like that, the very strategy that you wanted to use has a result of harming you, not only in your mental functions, but it also harms you in your physiological functions. It harms you in your spiritual functions. Harms you in your spiritual functions, because at that level, the place where you wish to do practice, the place where you want to have a spiritual experience, the place where you want to have a turnaround of your own energies into enlightened energies, that those energies are very, very delicate. and can be easily disrupted. And your anger energy floating around, the residue of anger, the adrenaline and the hormonal issues regarding this have a tendency to drive away your very spiritual values, which may have instigated this process in the first place. All right? If anyone want to think about anger as being the drug of choice in their activist arsenal, that not only our discussion here tonight, but also many teachings on the practical application of how to free up that energy of anger and how to reduce anger, as well as many in the Buddhist community teach about how little value anger has. Now, we wouldn't be talking about it so much unless you valued it so highly. I have had people tell me, anger is good, anger is very good, and anger acts as a way to stimulate myself. I can get going if I get really angry about something, then I'm going to do something about it. Or anger, no one will do what I say unless I get angry. And on and on and on, we go on the discussion, and then we go back to the mental, physiological, and spiritual effects of anger, and we say, which one will you choose? Which one will you choose? All right? Now, leaving that aside for a minute, leaving that aside for a minute, that we have the next step of anger, which is violence. And there is always the chance that among any group of beings who are attracted to certain activist sympathizers, that there is always someone there's the potential that not only are they an angry person, but that they also have a violent streak in them. And so those around that person who can only remain angry and not go to the next step of violence always are keeping in mind that this particular person requires additional watching so that they don't harm the entire project by being out of control. Isn't that so? And so it's not just a matter when you together with people. It's not just a matter of being alive to your cause, but you have to be alive to the community that is working in the cause, and you have to be alive to the danger that there will be others who will be attracted to your cause, who are mentally ill and who have agendas which are far more dangerous than what you are advocating. Isn't that so? And this is another reason why many in the activist community no longer participate in an active way, but they become armchair activists. I don't know what they call it. Is it okay like that? They become armchair activists where they generally support an issue, but they don't feel comfortable in going out and doing more because they're concerned with the atmosphere regarding that issue. Yes? All right. So, since anger doesn't work, and when you with others who have anger as their tool of choice, that you have methods as their tool of choice, that there are ways where you ignite each other, like what they call a mob mentality, even works in a very small group. I don't know, maybe there's some statistics that show which numbers increase to become a mob mentality, and at which point how few people you need together in order to be able to think as an individual in a group like that. Are you with me? All right. So another strategy is by boycotting. Now this is a very time-honored method of creating change. And apartheid was broken through this strategy. Isn't that so? In Africa, in South Africa? That boycotting goods from certain countries had a very profound effect in the more people that joined the boycott, the faster the results could be obtained. However, boycotts do not work without the strategy or various other types of strategies without awareness. Now, awareness is probably the best form of safe activism. What do you think? Creating awareness and spreading awareness of a particular injustice. Yes? Now, this awareness, without the awareness and without standardizations, without organizations, it would be no different than some street I saw, I think in Milwaukee recently, that someone put up signs everywhere, lost parakeet, lost parakeet, blue, like that. And these hand-lettered signs were on many different posts. It was an individual's effort to try to locate something that we don't think might be very easy to find. Isn't that so? That if you had the entire city of Milwaukee that would simultaneously go out and peer into the trees and into their backyard to see if the parakeet was there, I bet they could find it. However, an individual effort is at least something. And I've seen people who have homemade signs that they put out onto the sidewalk in front of their road that says, "Please slow down, children are present," and maybe something even stronger. There is a, yes, that an individual, someone in my neighborhood, put a sign up that said, "Your dog has been pooping on my lawn and I know who you are." Got me curious. And this is a personal agenda. It very much it required a strong sense of courage to do this, or whatever place they were coming from. This was a personal sense of awareness. The really important agendas, of course, require great numbers of people to have a similar awareness, and a similar agenda.
Okay, I'm gonna pause it there. So anything anyone wants to comment on? Anything you heard in the video here before we move on?
I hope we found the parakeet.
Yeah. Yeah.
I like the part you guys nodded about, which was to be alive to the community and the cause.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, she was really speaking to the issues that you all raised before about that challenge of, trying to create something together as a community, and, how important those relationships are, but recognizing, we're bringing perceptions and a lot of energy, and people are feeling really strongly about what it is that they're trying to accomplish through their efforts. Yeah. So she describes strategies that people use to try to affect change. And what I'd like to do is kind of shift our conversation now to the idea of mindfulness in this process. So as you think about some of these problems that arise from strategies that we may use as advocates, how might mindfulness help us in our efforts to affect change more skillfully?
I feel like mindfulness sort of dispels the problem of anger in a lot of ways.
It dispels the problem of anger?
Or it can help too.
Yeah?
Yeah.
You want to say more about that? How does that happen?
Well, like mindfulness brings awareness of the problem and possibly its sort of root causes. And when you...
the problem you're seeking to affect?
Okay.
And
so when one is more aware of why a problem exists and maybe why the stakeholders are invested in that problem staying rather than changing, then you begin to more effectively, deal with the people whose lives may be affected by changing said problem.
Okay. So bringing mindfulness and awareness to the problem itself and the various elements associated with the problem and what created it.
But then there's also this aspect of know thyself. So like when you're more present mindfully with where you're at as an individual, it can be I don't know about y'all, but I feel unhealthy when I'm angry. And so bringing awareness to your own anger can sort of start to... Rinpoche talked about the not just the sort of effects on the mind that anger has, but also on the body and the spirit.
Yeah, and as you practice, as you practice in your own in efforts to move along on your own evolutionary journey, and you're attempting to, you're really doing meditation every day and practicing, you become more sensitive to those energies and more acutely aware of how toxic these kinds of strong energies are, and you feel it on multiple levels. And so one of the things I hear you saying is that bringing awareness to that is essential, right? And we know from, practices of mindfulness do soften the energy because you're distanced. You're not, when you bring awareness to it, you're not the anger itself. You're stepping back and observing. And this is creating a pause so that, what are you not doing?
Rousing the villagers with pitchforks and torches?
Yeah, this creates a space so that you're not just reacting. Because that reacting then leads to other issues that also feel toxic, that, we know, okay, I shouldn't have said that, or I wish I hadn't done that. Have any of you ever had this experience where you're like, oh my God, I can't believe that came out of my mouth, And the more you practice mindfulness, that doesn't happen quite so frequently. Yeah. Danima, did you want to say something?
Another thing Rinpoche had said about when the anger arises, if you give yourself that space that you were talking, what happens in the interim, you can actually think. You can kind of think about what the problem actually is, or maybe even other strategies to manage it, since we know that anger doesn't work.
Yeah. So when you're flooded with anger, you actually can't think, right? So you need a practice to bring awareness to it so you can get to a place where you actually can think. Yeah, so that's a really good point.
I've seen sort of firsthand, like, the transformation of anger into violence.
Yeah.
Just, like, particularly in terms of, like, the kinds of activisms that young people can do, which feel really empowering but are really based in anger. Like, protesting can be really powerful and great, and can also turn violent.
Yeah. Yeah, it was interesting in this teaching further on. One of the students shared how she had been very actively involved in the peace movement during the Vietnam era. And her friends were very aware they were gathering large gatherings to do a protest. And they were very aware that the energy was, elevating, and they were feeling very strongly about their wish to end the war and very strongly about the injustice that they perceived. And then they started to talk, and they were like, is this going to get us the desired results? And they were trying to look at the vision. What are we trying to create? We're trying to create, peace. And so then they very deliberately, they calmed themselves, and they said, now how can we do this in a peaceful way? And they lit candles, and they walked in silence. They thought, well, at least if we're not speaking, we can't say something we'll regret, right? So anyway, Thema.
Well, I was thinking of an example of that is the protests in Wisconsin here. And early on, maybe later it wasn't quite as easy, but early on, there was a lot of discussion about how so many people could be at the Capitol, in the Capitol, and surrounding the Capitol, and have so little difficulty, so little violence, so little arrests. And that the people who were protesting and involved in the coordinating efforts talked about how they were very thoughtful in how they set up support and worked together and raised awareness within the group of protesters to be mindful and to govern their own behaviors so that that protest could continue in a manner that they didn't create a lot of friction with the police or with others. And when people who actually came, as Rinpoche said, that were more on the fringe, that might have been more violently oriented or intending to cause difficulties came, because the crowd was so mindful, a lot of times those people were just simply identified and requested to either depart or participate in a different way. And so that was really strongly on my mind, that we had such a positive experience for such a long time in Wisconsin. It did change a little bit toward the end, but the fact that we could go so long with so little incident was pretty surprising to me. And then to see now other places in the United States where people are protesting, it very quickly diminishes. And I think in Wisconsin it was due to both sides really bringing mindfulness, not just one side. Whereas other areas we might see more anger and aggression and violence introduced from one, either from maybe the police force or from the protesters or maybe from both, and it doesn't go the same way.
Yeah, it makes a huge difference. And it also creates the space. A lot of people have talked about how when they're able to hold the vision of what they're trying to accomplish and they're practicing mindfulness while engaging in these, whether it's protests or whatnot, that they're in actually a space to dialogue with those that have a different view. And really it's through those dialogues that a greater understanding can come and some possible good might come from it. Like you were saying earlier, that you have to understand the perspectives. One of the persons in this report had talked about this experience of being with a group of people to rally against this nuclear power plant. And somehow they ended up sitting at the lunch table with the workers of this power plant. And those that they had perceived as their enemy, and these ignorant people, how could they possibly work in this organization that has the potential for such harm? And they got to know them and hear about their children and understand, why they had this job and, hear about what they cared about. And they stopped viewing them as an enemy and began to understand more about the situation. And it didn't change the fact that this was a problem, but it did really shift their capacity to be more skillful in what they were doing.
I was thinking along similar lines, if you bring mindfulness and you include an awareness of the humanity of the people on the other who are holding the other position, that it creates a certain amount of respect and ability to reach them. And I'm reminded of a story. I actually heard it from Siri, but she heard it from the man who taught how to create peace. And he had been captured, I'm assuming he was in one of the wars, I don't know. He'd been captured by the enemy, and there was this man who would come in, and this man's job was to torture him. And so what he did was, when the man would come in, he would talk about his own family and ask the man about his family. And over time, this torturer actually helped him escape because he connected with the humanity of the torturer, and he let the torturer know that he was also human. He had a mother, he had family, he had things he cared about, and he really connected on this humanity level until the fellow whose job was to torture him was just like, couldn't do it anymore.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, that actually brings up a thought for me is, when we say mindfulness, what do we mean, and what are we being mindful of? Because there's so many different things that we could be mindful of. We could be mindful of our own thoughts and actions. We could be mindful of others' thoughts and actions. We could be mindful of this thing that you were talking about before, in terms of challenges. We could be mindful of, sort of the overall vision or the big picture, or we could be mindful of how does this affect the greater situation. For instance, when you were saying people were focused on creating social changes and then not realizing that the net outcome was more difficulty because they weren't noticing how it was affecting other things.
Yeah. So, it's a very good point. So, yeah, we do need to talk about what is mindfulness. And so some of the things we're talking about are really kind of considering or reflecting on these other issues and may not be necessarily mindfulness per se. Do you have a quick question? Or?
I just wanted to reflect on, with all these different stories, it seems like that mindfulness really begins with the self, and then it once there's the awareness here, then it moves out. And I know this doesn't really pertain to the big picture of things, but recently when we watched Groundhog Day, it was like the main character of the story really ended up being more mindful of the community when he became mindful of his own self and his own actions.
Yeah. So mindfulness is traditionally defined as paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally. And it has to be and start with the self. We can't be mindful of someone else. The mindfulness comes from within ourselves. So we can bring awareness. So it's paying attention. Well, and we'll talk about the elements of this because that's the next thing I'd like to talk about, because there's 3 important elements of it.
Can you say?
But and there's other ways to think of it. It's knowing what you're doing while you're doing it is another way you can think about it. But it's paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally. And a model of mindfulness that I really like has 3 components to it. And the first component has to do with one's intentions while engaging in mindfulness, and also could be considered one's motivations. And our intentions really set the stage for what's possible. And they remind us of why we're practicing mindfulness. And mindless advocates may not have awareness of their underlying intentions of what they're doing, and that can often get advocates into trouble. And in some of Rinpoche's teachings, she's talked about the importance of thinking about what is underlying our intentions for engaging in these actions. We can be doing something that's perceived on the outside as being a very virtuous activity, but it may or may not really be. It may be very self-serving. We can engage in social justice activities so that others will admire us. And we may really want to be successful so that we'll be well liked or admired or respected. We may be and I think about sometimes our motivations for social justice work can be motivated by fear, right? That I'm so afraid for my children that I'm going to try to change this. And it's a self-cherishing motivation and intention. And, so it's really valuable, I think, just to really reflect for anyone who wants to engage in these efforts to bring awareness to what are our intentions and what are our motivations. Are we working with or without personal agenda? And we can't know the motivations or intentions of others, right? So it's not, this is really, again, from the inside out. The second component of a mindfulness practice is this paying attention piece of it and awareness. So we pay attention with our awareness. That's what we have to pay attention with. And it's paying attention to both the internal and the external experience, moment by moment, to see clearly what's arising. So this wonderful example you talked about, Lakipu, that sometimes, we can be flooded with anger. And we can react to that, or we bring awareness to it. In that moment, like if we're training our mind with mindfulness, in that moment we might notice, I just was flooded with anger. Oh, wow. And you might pause and bring awareness to it. And you might ask yourself, where do I feel this? What part of the body? How big is it? What color is it? What happens to my breathing while I'm feeling this? And as you bring awareness to it, you might notice that, and you will notice, it will change. And you might bring awareness to that. How interesting. How curious that when I observe it here, it goes somewhere else. Where does it go? So there's myriad ways we can bring awareness to what arises in our feelings, our thoughts. We might bring awareness to, so a lot of us, academics, we've been trained to have a lot of thoughts. And we can identify, just like with strong emotions, we can identify with our thoughts. And we think, I am this thought. This thought is real. It's really an important thought. It's a good thought, right? We become the thought. But thoughts just come and go. They're not who we are. And we can observe them. And we can observe them come and go. And not be so identified with them. So we get the space to be able to see more clearly what's arising. So the thing it's really kind of interesting is that we can pay attention to the states of mind, too, that we bring to social justice efforts. And Rinpoche has said that ideally, activism should be performed by enlightened beings. That would be great, and it is. But until we are enlightened beings active in the world, she said it's really wonderful if we can bring greater awareness to our thoughts, our feelings, our intentions, our motivations. Then we can be more skillful. Because then we start to see, I have a tendency to do this. I need to be more careful here. Those with awareness are going to be more careful. Well, with awareness and who care, right? People who say, anger's toxic, I'm not going to do it. It's not worth the cost. She talks about how there should be a price tag that you can, it's like, okay, there's the anger. Is it worth paying that price to take on that? She said, anger is the mother of failure. And she talks a lot about how it burns you out. She said, among social activists, burnout is rampant. Among activists, or when people start learning meditation for the first time, the idea of accepting things as they are is really confusing. Because really, we have these feelings and thoughts that arise, right? And in mindfulness, we're taught to accept what arises. And then we could think, well, I don't want to accept that. I don't like it. But the reality is, it is. It is there, you know. And so you have to accept that it's there and bring awareness to it. It's simply that. Not accepting circumstances. Oh, this is a quote from Mirabai Bush, who's done a lot of work in. She wrote the book with Ram Dass. What's it called? It's not Compassion in Action. Oh, it might come to me, but it's a book about peaceful social engagement. But she said, not accepting circumstances isn't going to change them, and in fact, it keeps you from seeing things as they are. That prevents you from being able to do the most effective action to change them. So, we need to have equanimity to see things as they are in order to be capable of continuing in the work. So this is, both. This is also equanimity in terms of the situation itself. It doesn't help us just to be angry about it. We do the very best we can, and then we allow what to arise arises, and then we decide where we go from there. Okay. And no, I'm not going to do that. The third thing, the third element of a mindful practice involves cultivation of particular attitudes, and the non-judgment is one of them that's really important. But there are other attitudes that may greatly help us in our advocacy efforts that are traditionally taught as part of a mindfulness practice. And these are a lot of attitudes that were taught on the Bodhisattva path. So it's great because we get to continue to, practice these within a mindfulness practice. But they're things like patience, trust, non-reactivity, acceptance, kindness, beginner's mind, trying to see things really fresh. I often think I have this beautiful image of this little child who's like watching, the dandelions float in the sky, and it's like they've never seen it before and it's all new. And having these perceptions that are just fresh, seeing things fresh, opens up possibilities. And so that's another thing we can do is cultivate a curiosity. And, like you were saying, this curiosity of the perceptions of others. And it just opens doors for us to work in a different way. So mindfulness promotes wise action because we are practicing this greater awareness. There's space for something else to arise. It allows us to see how the process of our own activism for seeking change matters. It helps us to engage in a more peaceful process, and we know that that's necessary in order for there to be a peaceful outcome. We can't have an angry process and expect a peaceful outcome. It helps us to be aware of the impact of our own actions on others, because we bring mindfulness to that. We're aware of what arises within us. We become mindful of how our actions affect others. Are we getting the desired result? Oh, that didn't quite work. What happened? And then we try something else. And it helps us to shift from the adversarial to a more to a different kind of framework that will work. All change agents have an agenda, but how they go about attempting to accomplish that is really important. So that's really in a nutshell. And further in this DVD, I just want to let you know it's really wonderful. Maybe we can watch it some other time. But she talks about the force of idealism and how that can positively affect the underpinnings of the world. Why personal violence and agenda won't help, and how the awakening of idealistic energy will bring healing to the world. She explains that what will really help our efforts in activism is to become enlightened. And I want to read you a quote. She said, "What is the difference between those people who are highly effective in activism and those who are frothing at the mouth and running around the streets? Because the ones who are angry, who have had that moment of idealism, they need to practice. They need to become the one. They need to be alive first, and then rush to do the famous work." And on Thursday, September 25th, Rinpoche is going to be teaching on turning the mind toward enlightenment. And so that'll be a wonderful, wonderful teaching to help us move in that direction. And then finally, I just wanted to share just a few more thoughts for contemplation. So we've been talking about social change today, and we know that that involves trying to create a better world, better society, improve our social policies, reduce inequities, all of these things that are so important to all of you here. You wouldn't be here if you didn't care about this. And do you think we could ever solve all the world's problems through social activism? Do you think we would ever do that?
Yeah, if we were really, really good at it.
Really, really good? So going out there and marching and giving talks and...
Oh,
No, you can't win samsara.
Right. You can't win samsara through that kind of activism. Do you think there will ever be enough rules or laws to make everyone behave the way they need to behave? Okay. Probably not. Do you think it's possible to transform this world to become a peaceful, gentle, and kind place to live?
Yes.
Yes. And how will this change come about?
Spreading the Dharma. It doesn't necessarily have to be the Buddha Dharma, but it does need to be the Dharma.
Okay, spreading the Dharma. That's what else? Mm-hmm.
Changing my own mind
Mm-hmm.
so that it's peaceful and has these
Mhm.
qualities that I wish for the world.
Mm-hmm.
And then seeing how that changes my own experience and inspires others toward a more peaceful experience.
Yeah. So, really, if you think about it, the only way this will work, and in Buddhism this is what we say that we have to transform our own minds. It has to happen within us, because we can never fix everyone else out there through our own human efforts, no matter how long we lived. We have to transform our minds. We have to awaken. We have to become the one capable of liberating sentient beings, right? And that can only happen through this personal transformation. And there are beings on this planet who are awake and who are alive and who serve as models. And, how wonderful. And then it's like everyone who comes into contact with that person sees something and is alerted, oh my goodness, there's another way of being alive. And this person, these enlightened beings are harmless. They can't harm anyone. And one by one we transform. One by one we change. And as we change, everyone around us experiences being in relationship with someone who's transforming, and they see what's possible. And then they're like, oh my goodness, how wonderful. And so one by one. And so this is what the Buddha taught about how this works. We can't force it on others. And so it becomes really, it's another way of thinking about social change, that, we can try to do it out on the outside, much more skillful to really transform ourselves so that, yes, we can still engage in these activities on the outside. We'll probably be more skillful as we become more skillful. And I just want to read the Taoist prayer for peace, because it speaks to this issue. Okay? If there is to be peace in the world, there must be peace in the nations. If there is to be peace in the nations, there must be peace in the cities. If there is to be peace in the cities, there must be peace between neighbors. If there is to be peace between neighbors, there must be peace in the home. If there is to be peace in the home, there must be peace in the heart.
I'm thinking about Thich Nhat Hanh, and I'm not sure if he coined the term, but in his community there's a term, socially engaged Buddhism.
Yes.
And I think that when people hear that term, they often think of activism and creating social change and being engaged in practices of generosity, of giving toward the homeless, or being involved in some way that contributes to the community. But when I think of socially engaged Buddhism, I feel like sometimes we underestimate the power of this internal transformation and how it can permeate any activity and sort of transform almost any activity that we're doing into socially engaged Buddhism.
That's right.
Because it's transforming and inspiring the activities and environment and relationships that we have. And so it's so important. I feel like personally, I'm so inspired and feel it's so important to have the time for those internal changes, whatever they are, even if they're just on the cushion rather than, out in the community. And I'm not diminishing helping feed people, helping our community in many different ways, but that cushion time or that inner transformation time is so important.
Thank you, Pema. That was a wonderful observation. I appreciate you sharing. Dee Dee?
I'd like to just piggyback on that. In Roman's classroom, one of his teachers has put up a sign that says, "I'm second."
My daughter wears that sign.
I love that. He brought it to the classroom because he went to a camp when he was a kid that actually they expressed I'm third, where they put faith first, everybody else second, and yourself is third. But it's public school, so they can't bring religion into it. So he decided that he wanted to put I'm second, and this has really inspired Roman. I really want to help others, and it's.
So Dee Dee was saying that her child's teacher put up a sign that says I'm second, and so and our daughter wears a sign that says I'm second, and she's a 17-year-old, and then what happens is people come up to her and they'll say, "You're second? Why are you second?" And she'll say, "Because you're number one." And so it's a way of inviting this opportunity to help others feel that they're important and valued. So yeah, it's very sweet.
Yeah, I just think it kind of, how do you change yourself by helping others,
Yeah.
And being
To love, serve, and remember. Yeah. Do you want to sing? Why have you come to earth? Do you remember? Why have you taken birth? Why have you come to love, to serve, and remember? To love, to serve, and remember. To love. So we'll practice that. Thank you all for coming today and for your wonderful contributions to this really important topic. And perhaps sometime we'll have an opportunity to watch some more of this teaching. Please join me in dedication. May my capacity for compassion be infinite. I dedicate these efforts to complete and total enlightenment, so that I may be of benefit to all sentient beings. May it be so.